Now, the blasts in Iran happened while foreign ministers from the G7 nations wrapped up talks on the Italian island of Capri. The 7 leading industrial democracies warned of new sanctions against Iran for its drone and missile attack on Israel last weekend. They called on both sides to avoid an escalation of the conflict. Now, during this summit, Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock criticized Iran for its attack on Israel.
Against the backdrop of reports about the attacks on the 19th of April, we call upon all parties to work to ensure that there is no further escalation. As the G7, that is exactly what we're doing these days. In Berlin this morning, the government's crisis unit met under the guidance and leadership of the Foreign Office. The federal government continues to watch the situation on the ground. It's a fact that last weekend, Iran, in an unprecedented manner, escalated the situation and tried to take to the brink of chaos a region at large.
Her colleague, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, says measures will be taken against Iran.
You saw as well, or you'll see soon in the G7 statement, a commitment to hold Iran to account for its destabilizing activities, holding it to account by degrading its missile and drone capabilities. And yesterday, the United States announced additional sanctions on Iran, targeting UAV programs, the steel industry, companies that are associated with the IRGC, the Ministry of Defense, and its armed forces logistics. The G7 statement makes clear that G7 countries will adopt additional sanctions or other measures in the days ahead.
DW's chief international editor Richard Walker gave us his assessment of the G7 statements.
There's been a pretty kind of cagey and very cautious response from Western leaders from the G7, echoing that today. So you know, using the kind of language we just heard from Annalena Baerbock in the clip there, the wording that she used was something along the lines of, in light of reports of strikes on April 19th, so today's date, we urge all parties to work to prevent further escalation. That's almost exactly lifted out of the G7 foreign ministers' communique that was issued today. So they're really kind of sticking to a script, I think, there. And I think it points to really two priorities that they have. First of all, is that priority of trying to ensure that there is no further escalation. They really don't want this to spin out of control. So they don't want to say anything that could heat up the situation further. And then, as a second point, a priority is reassurance to Israel that they've got Israel's back diplomatically, that it's not up to Israel really to try to resolve this entirely militarily, that, for instance, as we just heard from Tony Blinken, the US Secretary of State there, that more sanctions are on the way, either already from the US and the UK or potentially down the road from other G7 member states. So trying to kind of reassure Israel enough that Israel doesn't feel that it's got it completely in its hands to respond to Iran's very large attack, which happened so recently. So I think the hope among the G7 foreign ministers, among the Western community as a whole, but of course also in the Middle East and really everywhere, is that, you know, escalation can be avoided, that this may even be the end of this particular exchange between Israel and Iran.
Now, let's take a look at the wider region. How did the neighboring nations react?
Yeah, so I think I would be interested to look at Jordan as a really interesting player here, because Jordan, as we saw when Iran launched those 300 plus missiles and drones towards Israel, Jordan was, alongside the United States and other Western countries, was one of the countries that helped Israel to shoot those down, shooting down such projectiles that were going over its territory. So a really strong, really concrete act of support there from the Jordanians to the Israelis. And the Jordanian foreign minister today was saying that Israeli-Iranian retaliations must end and that the inhumane war on Gaza must end now. So trying, I think, like we just heard from Christian Hellberg, trying to get the focus back to the situation in Gaza, saying that is the priority for Israel's Arab neighbors, and that it wants this not to spiral into an escalation between Iran and Israel. And I think Jordan's position here has particular weight, not just towards Iran, which will be seeing, okay, this is one of Israel's neighbors really helping it against us, but also its words have weight towards Israel, towards the Israelis thinking, well, the Israelis don't want to put a country that has just shown such solidarity with it, stuck its neck out for Israel, not to put it then in a more difficult situation by moving to an escalatory response. So that could have been one of the factors that contributed to, and if this is the case, that this really was the limit of the Israeli response, that we're going to see this pretty small response by Israel to that large attack from Iran. Jordan's position could be one of the factors that it's considering.
DW's Chief International Editor Richard Walker there. Thank you very much, Richard.